I live in this blurry swirl of mass and motion. Even when we've cleaned our house, it is like an ocean with a rising tide and an undertow, and the waves roll in and out. Someone's left mitten has disappeared. But look, the sandal we searched for all summer long is suddenly back in the middle of the floor. No one knows how. We scramble in the morning looking for William's backpack. We're all looking. Somebody says, "Oh, I found it." Wait, no, that's Jackson's backpack from 5th grade, the one that disappeared. And look, it still has his homework. Anything you set down can sink and later resurface anywhere, but I have my own private little island. It's on top of the bathroom medicine cabinet. I'm the only one who can reach it. So that's where I keep my toothbrush so I don't get dragon breath at night. My little scissor because my eyebrows get kind of wizardy about once a week. Razor and some shaving cream because my cheeks get kind of wolfy about once every full moon. So all of my protective talismans and charms live on this enchanted island where the elves and dwarves and the hobbits and little goblins can't get to them. It's best for all of us this way, or else things could really go just full-on Lord of the Rings in my house. Well, we got the house professionally cleaned, and they did fantastic, but they wiped out my little island. Each one of these little things just disappeared into some other like nook or cranny or shelf or drawer of the bathroom, and I'm still getting it back together. And it's got me thinking, it's as if some like sea monster just came and swallowed my little scissor. In the biblical book of Job, God is hanging out with one of the angels. And one of them has this job of being disagreeable. Since ancient Near Eastern kings were always surrounded by cronies and yes men and spin doctors, they had to have one advisor in the cabinet whose job it was to always take the other side of the debate. And this adversary, this advisory position was called the Satan, and it's from this that we get the word Satan. But this was centuries before the church invented the devil, who exists to make the church look good by comparison. Anyway, God was chatting with his buddy, the angel Satan, and said, "Look at this guy Job, who loves me no matter what and whatnot." And the angel said, "I think he only loves you because you're always giving him stuff. But I'll bet that if it was all stripped away, he would curse you." And God, who I guess is kind of in like a gaming mood, says, "Go for it." And Job loses everything. Lock, stock, and barrel. Fire from the sky burns his flocks. A house collapses on his children, and his body breaks out in a rash. And this poor guy is left with nothing but a piece of broken pottery to scratch his itches with. Then his 3 best friends show up, and they try to talk him to death. And when he's witnessed and withstood all of this without renouncing his faith, God finally shows up, but doesn't apologize. God launches into this long speech to let this guy know how small he is. And the whole thing ramps up to a big fish story. Like big fish of biblical proportions about how God once caught a gigantic, unholy mackerel, and it goes on and on, and I've edited this down, but still, it's going to seem lengthy. God is towering over Job and says, "Can you draw out the Leviathan with a fish hook, or press down its tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in its nose, or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it make supplications to you? Will it speak soft words to you? Will you play with it like you would with a bird? Or will you put it on a leash for your little girls? Any hope of capturing it will be disappointed. Were not even the gods overwhelmed by the sight of it? Its sneezes flash forth light. Out of its nostrils comes smoke as from a boiling pot of burning rushes. Its breath kindles coals, and a flame comes out of its mouth. On earth it has no equal, a creature without fear. This goes on and on and on. Like if your, uncle ever told you a big fish story. This is like this, but bigger. But in the story, a great sea beast is not Job's problem. It's not the Leviathan that killed his children and flocks and afflicted his skin with boils or whatnot. It's the Satan. Or really, since God empowered this angel to torment this innocent man, Job's problem is God. More specifically, God's pride. There was no reason for an enlightened deity to take such offense and accept this bet. And God actually wins the bet. Job stays true, but nonetheless, God shows up, and we really have to hand it to Job because he's been totally ruined, and now he's got to sit through this story about how God once caught a fish this big. And when God says this big, he can reach really, really far. But battling a sea monster was like a rite of passage for young storm gods. Baal, the indigenous Israelite lightning god, had to battle Yam, the primeval sea. Or in one version, his sister had to do it for him, but then he took all the credit. Ra, the Egyptian god, had to battle the serpent Apep, the chaos serpent who tried to swallow the sun each day. Marduk, the Babylonian thunder lord, had to battle the saltwater goddess Tiamat, his own grandmother, who had taken the form of a giant crustacean. And he split her to pieces like a clamshell. Half became the platter-shaped world, and the other half became the dome of the sky. That is the Babylonian creation story of creation from chaos. It comes from splitting this clam, but it also comes from fighting your own past, fighting your own grandmother. This, I think, is the clearest of the stories, because in the Babylonian story, Mumu Tiamat, Mother Ocean, was the primeval sea, the original great power of creation. And Marduk's battle with the primal goddess is clearly a sign of a male mutiny, after which the defeated fertility goddess became a symbol of destructive chaos, while the warrior god became the symbol of destructive order. Like the Hydra, or any number of Greek mythical monsters. We may think of these monsters as male, but the Leviathan could represent some prehistoric sea goddess. Still, for those of us who remember the old claymation Clash of the Titans and smirked at the lion, release the Kraken, it can still be hard to take the Leviathan story very seriously. But this was a really big deal, the Leviathan fight. It was a major claim to fame back when, this is going to get hard to explain, but see if you can follow this. The idea of God, the calculating master craftsman of the clockwork universe, that idea is just a couple of centuries old. Before that, God had been more like a potter who took the primeval muck and shaped a large clay platter, the flat earth, which for a long time had been just the Middle East. And before even that, God had been the local thunder boss of Israel, a nation the size of New Jersey. And it was kind of a dump like New Jersey. But at least it wasn't a total mess, because God kept the chaos of the sea at bay by battling this monster. So before the local God of Israel achieved epic Springsteen proportions and became a global franchise, back when he was local, this Leviathan fight had been a really, really big deal. But as the Bible developed and the conception of God grew kind of greater, more abstract, more powerful, it became undignified to envision him mud wrestling this monster with all of creation at stake. The temple priesthood didn't want like King Kong versus Godzilla, or King God versus Kongzilla, or whatever. They were chanting priests, not screaming wrestling fans. So they downplayed this clash of the titans until it kind of faded into the background. And finally, the priesthood drafted their masterpiece, the 7-day creation story in which the master landscaper just dictated the development from chaos to creation in a calm, orderly manner. God doesn't have to get his hands dirty in that story. He doesn't even need hands at all. He just gives instructions and then inspects it and says, it is good. If we read closely in that Genesis creation story, sea monsters are actually right there on the checklist. But it's all part of the plan, and they pass inspection with never a mention of hazard or friction. And the priesthood who wrote this new and improved creation story got final editorial control over the Torah, and so they put their story first, right at the beginning. And then the whole finalized Torah got retrojected back into the dawn of time, where every jot and tittle inevitably was predestined, so that these stories in this sequence became older than the earth itself. Some of us believe this and some of us don't. And some of us are totally lost, and that's okay. But we still have a hard time, I think, imagining that the Israelite conception of creation was fluid. And for centuries, it drifted through phases, and it evolved, and it changed, and it developed before getting set in stone as timeless scripture. So the final sequence creates this odd situation because now, when we encounter the Leviathan legend in the books of Job, Psalms, and Isaiah, we say, wait, didn't God make the sea monsters and say they were good? So why all this gladiatorial thrashing and slashing and bashing? In some scriptural texts, the Leviathan has already been killed and dismembered, his carcass left out for scavengers. And then in other biblical texts, it's still alive somewhere. Some rabbinic commentators have sought to smooth this inconsistency by saying that once upon a time there were 2 Leviathans, and God killed the female and castrated the male, which seems doubly cruel. Or some say it was like a catch and release, and God caught this thing and then kept it as a pet that he plays with for a couple hours at the end of each day, fattening it up for a big fish fry to feed the righteous in the world to come. But whatever the story meant, we've got to remember this was before the invention of the devil, before the great beast of Babylon. This was when God needed a great enemy, before the introduction of religion's all-time greatest nemesis, the snooze button. Religion's battle with the primeval sea monster can sound like some phase from the mythical past, but it continues into the present. These days, the battle is waged in courtrooms and classrooms. Religion versus evolution, the theory that all life comes from the primal ocean. That's the shapeless sea monster that Christianity is fighting today. And it's a good fight, a worthy cause, because if we were to accept that all organisms are descended from the same original single-celled creature, the primates and pine trees, the portobellos and pond scum, the puffer fish, and the pests would all be our distant cousins. Really? Because I have a hard enough time believing we're related to Pennsylvanians. But if we acknowledge that kinship, that interconnection, even interdependence, then we would have to seriously reconsider the way the human race goes stomping around in the community of life. And that's a pretty daunting prospect. It's much easier to keep fighting a mythical sea monster, a formless darkness on the face of the deep, than to fight our own appetites for plastic and gasoline and these other things. The Inuit, the indigenous peoples of Alaska and parts of Siberia, believe that the icy depths of the ocean are ruled by a sea mother, Sedna. And various tribes have varying stories about her origin. Most agree that she was once a giantess, either disobedient or dangerous to her father, so he cut off her fingers and she sank into the deep waters. And her fingers became the whales and the seals, whom she still commands. And if the humans disrespect her, she will withdraw them all so far under the ice that the hunters will come home empty-handed. And they say that this ocean goddess looks like a mer whale, and that once a year, the tribal shaman must enter into a trance and send his spirit deep, deep into the underworld to comb her hair, and that this is what makes it okay. Well, that's a nice story. Instead of fighting the chaos, getting into some big mythical monster mash of Bigfoot versus Loch Ness or whatever, instead of battling the chaos, you learn to balance with it. In humanity's war to tame nature, it becomes clear it's not the great white whales that pose the greatest danger. It's the mad Captain Ahabs of industry and politics. Mother Nature doesn't need to be bludgeoned to death. Maybe she just wants us to comb her hair. Now I just need to find the comb that got swept away from my little island. Thank you.